Making a fashion commercial with little to no money is one of the most difficult but common challenges of a cinematographer. Any successful narrative fashion commercial feels realistic but has a very specific look. There are so many ways to execute this, but where do you even start? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that by breaking down a narrative fashion commercial. I'm going to be breaking down all the lighting and camera settings to show you exactly how we pulled this off. The first scene that we're going to be looking at is this garage scene where we introduce the whole narrative of this commercial. And the first thing I really want to cover is the cameras that we used on this commercial, and think about this as a master list as we go throughout the entire commercial and breaking down all these scenes. So we used a combination of two cameras, the Sony Venice as well as the FX3. And you guys know that I love to use this camera because it is so versatile and just allows me to get any shot that I really want when it comes to cameras matching and everything like that. For lenses, we use a combination of lenses. We had a Sony FE, it's a 70-300 lens, and we use that on the Sony FX3 because of autofocus and just allowing us to get a long focal length. And then in combination with that, we have the Leica Rs, and these were picked up from the rental house, and I was using them on another project, and then I just extended the rental into the weekend so we could use them. And these are nice vintage lenses that really give you that look that we're going for when you're trying to create a narrative commercial that's supposed to look very naturalistic and film-like. And in combination with that, we use a 12mm, which is made by Laowa. So this was the entire gear set used, and I was mainly shooting on sticks as well as a dolly, which we're going to be diving into next. So when we talk about camera settings specifically and how I like to set up my scenes, I generally like to set everything up on a tripod, and you can see all my camera settings here. In this case, I am just setting things up to see how they look, and I'm talking with my assistant director to see how the blocking is going to look before I tell my team to, okay, this is where exactly I'm going to be setting up my dolly. Right now I have a clear ND, I'm shooting at 2500 EI. I'm gonna probably adjust my values in a bit just so I can get a better sense of everything and how is it looking. And the main thing that I saw was that everything was looking a little flat just due to the lights that are all around. So at this point I have everything set, and I'm going to tell my team to exactly where I want to put my dolly track. And for this, I wanted to get a high dolly, and to do that, you need a bunch of risers that you can see that we're putting on the dolly right now. And these are made by Pro-Aim, and they're Mitchell mount risers that allow you to get the camera so high above the track so you don't see the edge of the track. And once we had everything up and ready to go, I noticed that everything was looking flat. I wanted the viewer and I wanted the attention to be focused on the middle of the frame. And if you look around and look at all the lights blasting on the garage, you could see that we weren't necessarily getting any shape. So with these fluorescent fixtures, if you just stick your finger up in there and twist the bulb out, they pop out. And then afterwards, when we were done, we just pop them back in. And then that just allowed the focus to really help in the center. So I got one that was on the left side of the frame, and then one was on the right side, so I could really focus all the attention in the middle of the frame. And then this is us setting up the shot. And then we just did a bunch of takes with the actor, me pushing the dolly, and then the director getting a specific blocking that he wanted. And then we had him come in from the left, so it gives you a little bit more directional. So he is coming in from the left, I'm coming in from the right. And then we move on to the coverage in the scene where he just puts the bag on the ground and we have our camera low to the ground. And then this one was a little funny because we were trying to get the car cover off in one pull, but we couldn't do that with a car cover tight, so we had to cheat it. So I framed up very tight so you only see the headlight. And then as they pull the car cover off, I had my assistant director help me. And then the photographer, who's actually standing right here, he is acting as we like to call a meat flag. So he was wearing all black, and this gave me just a little bit more contrast back into the headlight when they pull off the car cover. And this is the reality when you're shooting narrative commercials like this, where you don't necessarily have a lot of time and you have to think quickly on our feet. We are moving between multiple cars, and I don't have time to set up a C-stand and a floppy and a flag. I could easily have somebody hold just a small flag or a black Bristol board, but I was just thinking quick on my feet. I saw my photographer was wearing all black, so I just put him in and he was just casting a shadow perfectly. And then I wanted a high angle shot of him basically opening the trunk and then pulling off, but I didn't want to get out a ladder, and then we already had the dolly built, so I'm like, perfect. I'm just going to use this for this entire shot, and it worked out perfectly. So this is just, again, thinking quickly on our feet so we can get as many shots as possible done. And the next next thing that we're doing here is setting up for him pulling off as he's done with the car and everything like that. And what I saw is one of the videographers had this handy cam thing here and he had a light on it. And then I saw him flashing the light when we were just setting up when I had my camera and everything. And I liked the orange tone that it was basically portraying on his face. So what I had is somebody just hold a Titan tube, and this is at 20% set at 4000 Kelvin, just to give that warmth and color contrast back into the shadow side of my subject. And then I just have that blasting over here just to add some contrast because we already have our fluorescent tubes coming in here and lighting him as well, which you're gonna see later on when we break this down fully. So if we just play this out, this is just me testing the things to see if like, oh, if we open the window or what options necessarily look like. So that tube light is really acting as a hair light. And what I really liked is when he turned on the car and simulated that the car was turning on, and we just did this with the headlights because this was a diesel engine and we didn't want to constantly start and stop the car because it doesn't have spark plugs, it has glow plugs. So we just simulated that by turning on the headlights because the car was already running. But what I liked that it did is that it flared the lens and it gave you a visual cue that the car was started, and then he just pulled off. And then we just had him pulled off to the side in clear frame. And then that was it. As you know, we were shooting this on the Sony Venice, but my EI was set at 2500. So if we just talk about EI, we're talking about our base ISO, and it's the second base. So this operates at 500 and 2500. And I like this to do this for dark, moody scenes like this, because what I do is I set it at my second base, then everything is so bright, and then I ND the camera down. So on this, I had 2 stops at ND, so I'm shooting at 0.6 ND, which is just internal ND. And then this was shot at the 12mm Laowa, and then we are sitting at a aperture of T to 2.9. And because this lens is so wide and we have an aperture like that, it really doesn't matter because really everything is in focus. This is just the lowest this lens stops down to, and it allows the most light to come in. And then you can see what we did with the lights here. We have the center light that is backlighting our subject and then allows us to focus on the center of the frame. And then we do have another light here. In a perfect world, this car wasn't gonna be here and we could have easily VFX'd it out again, but no budget. And we didn't have permits and ask people to move their cars. This was a public space. So I kind of like how this light is just adding some light as well, and we could have easily twisted that out, but I feel like that would have been too on the nose of like, oh, only this one light is on to highlight this one car. We just didn't have time and I didn't really think about it to do it. But the one light over here that we twisted out completely, you can see how that shadow just adds to the left side of frame and isn't too distracting. If we had that before with all this light here, it wouldn't be as nice, and I just wanted to add some shadow and play up on the fluorescent lights as well as the natural daylight that was coming into here. And then when we talk about direction and blocking specifically, my camera is pushing in on an angle into the center of the frame, and then we have our actor being revealed walking from left to right. So it kind of gives you a pinching point of exactly where to look at if we were to draw the lines going into the frame. And it's just automatically, the story is being told that he's walking to this car and he's about to put down his bag and pull off the cover. So that is just a little composing technique that I like to do, and especially when I like to do these high dollies. I would have loved it a little higher to be almost like crawling along the ceiling, but I didn't do a location scout to really figure out what this was going to look like specifically, because I wanted to maybe even put myself beside these pipes and push in. But again, we weren't just dealing with an ideal location where I could do that. Originally, I wanted to use a probe lens and get super close so we could have that detail and just everything moving by so slowly, and like you would have different perspectives of everything. But this was just us showing up on set, and this is the best thing I could do with the time that we had. The next shot in the scene that I wanted to cover is this one to see how that tube light was really helping the cell the scene and add a little bit more contrast into our image as well. So for our camera settings, again, we're shooting at 2500 EI. I really did not change this, but I changed to a 90mm lens, which was in our Leica set. And then I was shooting at an aperture of T2.8. I like to do this for narrative commercials specifically. I don't want to make it too dreamy or anything like that. I want to get the whole face in focus. And because I'm dealing with such a telephoto lens already, I already have all that compression to give me enough interest, and I don't need to blow anything out. And then also he was moving in and out, so I didn't want the focus to be breathing because these are vintage lenses that aren't necessarily rehoused or anything like that. And then for my camera's white balance, I am shooting at 5600 Kelvin just to make this as natural as possible. If you remember, we do have a fluorescent light bulb fixture out above, and that's shooting down like this. And then we do have another one here, which is acting almost as another edge light, and it's giving me some light on his face. When you really think about this and ask yourself about narrative commercials and not necessarily like a commercial, everything is going to be different when we talk about contrast ratios. This is a very heavy contrast ratio when you talk about the detail that is on the light parts of his face relative to the dark side of his face. If this was a commercial that I was selling like a high key product and everything like that, this would not be the play because the background is a little bit too distracting of it being too white, and I'm not automatically looking at something when it comes to commercials that are supposed to do that. This is a story that I've already set my tone and approach that this is going to be very dark and moody already. And then with that tube light that was set over here to that warm tone, this is just adding a bit of color contrast back into the right side of his face, which is on camera left. I thought it was just a nice detail, especially when he looks up at the mirror, you get a tiny catch light and everything like that. It's not too distracting or jarring. And then we just had that, we thought about maybe if we put it inside the car, but then that wouldn't necessarily make sense because he's moving. My whole motivation from that is because there was like this whole window on the other side of the fence so that whoever's watching this can say like, oh, that necessarily makes sense. Because in the wide shot of the frame, if we kind of go back to this for a second, you can see that natural daylight is coming through there, and it gives me a reason to motivate something. And that's what I like to do when we talk about these lights and everything like that. So very subtle, but just something that I added, and it took literally 2 minutes to do, and somebody was standing at the car the whole time, and it really worked out great. Going on to the next scene, the biggest tip I can give you when you're trying to get as interesting shots as possible is to bring a ladder on set. I like to get vantage points that are very weird and really out there. And if we talk about this scene specifically, we are talking about a parking lot, and then a lot of people wouldn't necessarily get this angle or show off this parking lot like this as well. To do this safely, I just like to point out what I'm using. So this is called like a little giant ladder. And then basically what it does is it compresses down to 8 feet, and then we extend it on set, and I can get up to 12 feet with height. And then I have 2 apple boxes, and then that is 2 halves apple boxes. They're skinny enough that I can put in the center without really running into anything. And then on top of that, I have a hi-hat, and this just has a 75mm bowl. And then I just took another tripod head that we have, and I have this live on there with another RE dovetail plate, and that just lives on there. I'm not pulling another tripod head. So usually I'm bringing 2 tripods with me on set just because we own them. And then under that, to make this safe as possible, because this would be sliding around everywhere, we have 2 ratchet straps, and then that just ensures that everything is tight. So what we do is we bring the ladder down to its lowest position, we ratchet everything up, put the hi-hat on and not the camera yet, and then we extend it up to the height that we want. And then I bring up the camera with my AC holding it in the bottom, and then I just securely put it on the top. When you're doing anything like this, just take your time, don't rush anything, because you don't want to be dropping equipment from that high. One, obviously to damage the equipment, but just to ensure that everybody's safe. And then one thing that I really want to point out here is this was just time of day. The sun is up here, as you can see, blasting down here. And then this is giving me a nice shadow on our car here. This is just the one rule that I like to do, is just shoot on the shadow side when figuring out any composition or anything like that. I already knew that I wanted to get this high angle shot, but I didn't necessarily know what the location looked like because I didn't do a location scout. I had pictures of what the basketball nets look like, but I didn't know what the parking lot looked like or where the sun was coming from. So this was just me arriving on set, getting that angle, and then figuring out where the shadow would be just relative to the sun. So this was a pretty long shot. We just had him get out of the car and like he's going to be playing basketball. And this is one of my favorite shots that I like to do, and I want to do more when it comes to car and fashion work, is framing our composition through the car with the actions. And I've seen a lot of references like this. I've seen them all over FrameSet and Instagram. And this is just me chatting with the director to say, where do you want him specifically in the car, in the window? And then that's just me adjusting everything. And then we have it cheated off enough that he's in the distance that we see him. And then everybody's just cheering him on to actually get the shot because it took a couple takes. And then later on, we have him just doing push-ups randomly. Again, this is a fashion film. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense, but the client really wanted that because that's something that he would feel that he would do. And then what I like to do is I like the director and client to be looking at the monitor, and then I like to show the talent specifically what we're doing, and just to have that connection so it's really easier. Because I can communicate with the director, I can communicate with the talent, and they can say, yes, I like that. And then this is our AD figuring out the best spot to do the push-ups as well. So very funny, and it was a really fun shot to do, and I was really looking forward to doing something like this. So this is the actual final shot from him shooting the net, getting the basketball in and then catching it. And then he puts the basketball in the car, takes off his hoodie, hangs it on the door. And then because we were framed so perfectly in what we planned on everything and just took so many times, he walks off to the spot that we marked with some tape, and then he does those push-ups right there. So very simple. The sequence was only 2 shots, but was very effective just due to our composing techniques. Now we're gonna look at the stills of that and break everything down, and you can see that this high angle really helps for a location that is basically boring. I'm playing up on the lines and leading lines of this entire thing, and the car is coming from here, but we do have that big sun that is acting as our massive harsh backlight. In a situation like this was around, I believe, like 2 or 3 o'clock. So not the best for sun, but it still gave us enough to work with because it's during the winter and the sun probably sets around like 5 p.m. So it really worked for us for what we were doing. And then I really like the headlights on here, and the colors even pop this even more. But you can see that harsh shadow on the ground that just adds so much interest. And this is just me shooting on the shadow side of my subject. In this case, it's the car. And then our talent gets out, walks around the car, and then that just sets us perfectly up for the next shot. When it comes to these fashion commercials and you don't have a lot of budget, the biggest thing that I like to really play up on is my natural environment and how to show it off in its best light. This is a boring parking lot with construction equipment everywhere and basically dead trees in the background as well as a highway. So I'm going to get my vantage point where it looks down on everything and then gives me nice symmetrical lines to work with. And this is just me thinking about the best way to really pivot and as well show off my location. And then as we move on to the next shot in the sequence, that sun is still in the background over here. And then this just helps light everything. But before we get into the lighting specifically, let's talk about the lens that we used for this. And this was the 21mm, and this was at T4. And that was just the Leica lens that he had in his kit. But as this is a wide angle lens, I don't mind shooting at such a high T-stop. And it really gave me a lot to work with, and I'm just sitting at 5600 Kelvin here. And then the colors pushed a little bit more warmth in this shot, specifically because you can see the halation and just adding that film look. But as we have that sun there, it's perfectly backlighting everything and coming in and giving us nice little highlights that we could work with as well. This sun was a little lower, it'd be blasting a lot more through and giving me a lot more to work with. But I really like the look that we're going for. And then this is just a common composing technique that a lot of people like to do, especially when shooting things like this, is that I have him in the center of the frame, but it's like almost off to the third, but there's just so much to look at. And because he's framed perfectly in this window, it's automatically telling the viewer where to look. We're, again, in the center of the frame, a little bit off. And then I have the hoop in the thirds and then this wheel in the back, which we thought was pretty cool in the thirds as well. And then we just moved up and down the seats. As you can see, they're not as symmetrical or anything like that, just to get as much interest and to not block him specifically as well. And then he walks up to the door and then does his push-ups in the background of the door there. And then it just really played up on the look that we were going for. Now let's talk about how to pivot and unexpected surprises. So I was really looking forward to shooting on this location because it's an iconic Scarborough spot and I drive by it basically every day when I go to work. Now this last scene is the one that I'm most excited to talk about because we had to deal with a lot of issues on set. Ideally, you make a plan, you have a specific shot that you want to get, but without a proper location scout or anything like that, you start to run into issues. And for us specifically, I wanted to showcase the neon sign that you don't honestly see here, which is on the left side of frame, but it hasn't worked for years when we talked to the owner. And then you can see that it's not the most maintained establishment, as you can see with the cardboard signs and paper signs on the windows and everything like that. And then what I had to do is basically pivot and figure out the shot that I wanted to get. And then I just took my phone and then I aimed at the corner and I'm like, perfect, we can get a high angle on this corner. But now I'm looking under all these rafters and everything and the lights don't work. There's only 1 or 2 lights that work. So I'm like, okay guys, let's get all the Titan 2 kit lights out. Unfortunately, I didn't have my iPad or transmitter. I said, everybody set them to 80% and set them to 5,000 Kelvin. I kind of eyeballed what the color temperature of the lights were there. And then I have my AC and my second AC as well as my grips setting up this setup that I was talking about before. Again, hi-hat, 2 half apple boxes, and some ratchet straps will go a long way. So as my swing and my gaffer are kind of setting up everything else, this is what we're working on. And you can see that I'm struggling with this plate. And then my AC just passes the camera. And then you can see in the background here with all those signs, they're a little bit lit up. And I love this quick release system by Bright Tangerine just because it's so easy to set up the camera. And again, we're using the Laowa 12 mil here. I have my camera's EI set to 2500, and then I had to boost it, which we're gonna be talking about when we actually start looking at the still. And this is what I wanted to highlight. You can see that we are lighting up all these signs here that didn't have lights necessarily beforehand. And we just pointed them up into the sign so it would kind of bounce off the back and then go into the sign to give us that red. It's not perfect like the sign's being illuminated perfectly, but it worked for us. And this was just a very long shot that we were getting as him walking out, placing his food on the back of the car. And then when we got this next shot with the low angle, we actually used another tube just to add some detail back into the back of the car because it was a little too dark, which we're going to be breaking down now. This shot was really exciting to me because it was highlighting somewhere that I grew up and basically something I drove past almost every single day, but really never went in. But I knew that it was iconic Scarborough spot. So when we talk about this, again, we're using the Sony Venice and I'm shooting at 2500 EI. I have this boosted actually 3200, so I'm just going up a little bit to give me some more details in the shadows because I saw on my false color that I was clipping in a little bit. So when we talk about this and like, oh, when is the best time to increase your EI? How much can I go? I just generally go with the rule of, am I maxed out on everything? So is my aperture fully open? Am I shooting at my highest ISO? Do I have enough lights and everything like that? And in this situation, what was clipping necessarily was the sky as well as the detail into the car because obviously it is black. And then now when we talk about the lights, again, I was just shooting this at 5600 Kelvin. I didn't really change that because I didn't see a need to, because we were shooting in RAW anyway. And then you can see that I have one Titan tube here, another one here, another one here, and another one here. I didn't really get the S, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I had one here and one here. So 5, 6. Another one right in here. So this is my 7th Titan tube. So all of these are set to 80% at 5000 Kelvin. And then again, I didn't have the iPad, my transmitter and everything like that. I was just setting it and forgetting it. And then I'm just like, guys, we have 2 hours to shoot this. Is that possible? And then we're like, we'll get out of here in an hour. So I wasn't concerned about battery life. And then this one I had set at like 20% and this was set at 4000 Kelvin. And this just looked like there was like a running light in there. And then we just set it down and then I had my gaffer just rotated as I was just trying to get the shape that we were looking for. And then again, it's a little dark down here just because I'm maxed out on my exposure, but the red taillights and even the headlights pointing down over there just really sell this, that there's a lot going on. I like to build pockets of interest in everything. And then when we have the Titan tubes, and all these lights coming down here. It just highlights this area perfectly, and even highlights this brick that isn't ugly, but it's lit perfectly. And then it really plays up on the symmetrical frame that we're trying to really play up on. Again, this is naturalistic lighting. I'm not going for anything too commercial. This is a fashion film that I can be very experimental with. If I had time and everything like that, I would properly light this with Titan tubes basically everywhere, and I'd need 2 or 3 kits to do that. So this was just me, time of day, luckily getting there. There's enough blue hour in the sky that we could really push this. The sun is setting over here, so we could even get a sunset shot. But then this was going us like, do we want the sunset, or do we want to play up on the aspect that this is a late night diner and just differentiate it as possible? So there's a bunch of looks that we could have gone for here, but I really set on this one and really put in the time of like taking that 20 to 30 minutes to say, hey guys, we're gonna get up on ladders and we're gonna put all those lights in there. The next shot that we did is I just literally took that hi-hat and the same camera settings and everything like that and put it on the ground and aimed it up at him to really give you this kind of hard look of him enjoying his food. And then this was the one light that was working, and then the other ones were just all Titan tubes, which you saw that we put up there. And because it was pointed up and you could see the screen of the Titan tube, and a lot of times I see these in movies, films, and commercials that they don't really black out the screen sometimes. And that's just a small detail that people miss, and I don't blame it because I've done it in the past as well. And then what we did is we just had him block it because we knew that we would cut to this when he was already in his position and he's already enjoying his food. So we didn't need the Titan tubes that were all on the left side. So what I had my gaffer do is just take one of those tubes and hold it, and then basically hold it horizontally and shine the light on my subject here. And I wanted to do that so I could establish a light and shadow side. So I'm shooting into the left side of my subject here, and I wanted to basically be all shadow down here. And then I wanted some detail because it's motivated from this light. And then I just had my gaffer hold a tube light. This is why I love tube lights. And you're gonna be like, oh, I don't have money for a Titan tube kit. You can literally pick up 2 aperture tubes or 2 nanlight tubes. It doesn't matter what tubes they are. And I like to just hold them and just aim them at my subject in a situation like this where I just need some light. I don't really care about diffusion or anything because this is very naturalistic and it already gives me a pretty soft look just looking at him. And then this just gives me a nice interest and contrast. I always like to build interest and contrast into my images as well. And then here we have the running lights as the car is still on, which just adds to it and adds more interest. But I saw that I was lacking detail on this side of the frame. So I believe I took the light that was inside the car and I was just holding the tube. I had this set at 4000 Kelvin and this is at 20% again. And then this one was at 5000 Kelvin and this was at that 80% that we were talking about. And then I just had the person holding it walk a bunch off so it wasn't really distracting or too harsh. So the one that said at 4000 Kelvin is I just held it horizontal and then I just kind of rotated it to see what would look best. And then you can see those little highlights in the emblem as well as the badges of the car. And it just lifted the exposure of the right side of the image because I knew that I was crushing at that point. And then I didn't want to flatten out my subject too much. So that's why we have the 2 different color temperatures here. And you can see that orange come back into the side of his face. I rotated it so it was mainly pointing at the car, but then it was still spilling everywhere because we're dealing with a tube light. So it basically spilled back onto my subject, but I had that color contrast, so it gave me a different type of light into the shadow side of my subject. And then if we look at the sky here, obviously it's not consistent to what we were looking at before, but it really doesn't matter because this is the interest that we're looking at into the frame. I would love this to be blue, but again, we were just dealing with time and logistics and getting the proper takes and everything. And we wanted the proper actor blocking, and that won't happen in one take, especially with such a long shot. I learned so much from this production, and I really wanted to hammer home the points of being able to work quickly on your feet, as well as showing off a location in its best light with composition techniques. That's the main thing in this fashion film, is because we didn't have budget for fancy locations, and we're using a bunch of favors and just a lot of public locations to make everything look good. But sometimes those locations don't look good at all, and it's all about how you think, how you can show it off in its best light.